welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be looking at a pretty big question.
Yeah.
The question of free will.
Oh, yeah. One of the big ones.
What are the biggest?
Yeah.
Do we actually have it?
Right.
Or are we just, our lives just playing out some kind of script?
Yeah, playing out a predetermined script.
That's right. And to sort of tackle this question, we're going to be taking some excerpts from a book chapter.
Right, the chapter you shared with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is how it kicks off.
Yeah.
With a really simple but powerful question.
Yeah, and what is that question?
The question is, if you could rewind your life to the very beginning and press play, would everything turn out the same?
I like that. What do you think?
It really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? Like, what shapes our lives, choice versus destiny? And the book actually presents 6 potential answers, each offering a different take on what causes the variation in our lives.
6 answers. Wow.
Yeah.
A lot to unpack. Okay, so what are some of those answers?
Well, you've got divine intervention.
Okay.
Where a higher power is orchestrating things.
Guiding events.
Exactly. Or quantum flukes.
Okay.
Where it's the randomness at the subatomic level that's influencing outcomes.
So it's like chance?
Yeah, kind of like that.
Okay.
You've also got God decides everything, which is fairly self-explanatory.
Right.
And everything happens for a reason.
Okay, so those are 4 of the 6. Are we going to go through all 6?
For this deep dive, we'll be focusing on the 3 that feel most relevant to a scientific perspective.
Okay.
So those are I could have done otherwise.
Okay.
The idea of quantum flukes and the concept of a deterministic universe.
Okay, so let's start with deterministic universe.
Sure.
I've heard that term before, but I'm not exactly sure what it means.
Well, essentially, determinism proposes that every single event, from the smallest to the largest, is a consequence of prior events.
Okay.
And the laws of physics.
So it's all kind of connected?
It's like a chain reaction that started with the Big Bang and keeps unfolding.
So every event leads to the next.
That's the idea.
And if we could rewind, like that initial question suggested, everything would play out the same way.
Exactly, because everything's already predetermined.
Okay, so is there a way that we can kind of visualize this?
Sure. Think of it like baking a cake.
Okay.
You follow a specific recipe with precise measurements for each ingredient.
Yeah.
If you follow it perfectly and use the exact same ingredients, you'll end up with the same cake every time.
Right.
So determinism suggests the universe operates in a similar way.
Okay.
All actions are predetermined by the initial conditions and the laws of physics.
So you're saying even something like me choosing to wear this shirt today.
That's what determinism argues, yes.
Was predetermined by the Big Bang?
It challenges our intuitive sense of agency, of making choices freely.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a mind-blowing concept.
It is a big one.
But hold on. You mentioned earlier that the book also talks about contingent flukes.
Right.
So how can those exist in a deterministic universe where everything is predetermined?
Good question.
Wouldn't that be a contradiction?
It might seem that way, but remember that determinism doesn't necessarily mean everything is predictable.
Okay.
Even in a system governed by fixed laws, tiny variations can lead to drastically different outcomes.
Oh, so like a tiny change
can
have a ripple effect?
Precisely.
Okay. So it's like even if the universe is playing out a predetermined script, there's still room for improvisation.
Exactly. And the book uses a great example for this.
What's that?
The Earth's climate.
Okay.
We know that climate is influenced by numerous factors, solar radiation, volcanic activity, even human activities.
Yeah.
And while scientists can model and predict climate trends to a certain extent, it's impossible to predict every single weather event with absolute certainty.
Right. So there's some unpredictability.
Absolutely. Even within a deterministic framework.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about human choices?
Right.
If everything is predetermined, does that mean things like self-improvement or personal growth are pointless?
That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
And it's something we'll definitely explore further in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But for now, consider this. Even if our choices are predetermined, the experience of making them, of struggling and striving, of learning and growing is still a real and meaningful part of our lives.
So even if the universe is a giant clockwork mechanism ticking along a predetermined path, we still have the ability to experience the journey.
Absolutely.
To feel the highs and lows and to make choices
yes.
that, while perhaps predetermined, still shape our individual narratives.
Precisely. The book argues that even though the impetus for change might originate from physical processes in our brains, the experience of making a choice, of feeling like we're steering the ship, is a crucial aspect of being human.
I like that. But wait, before we move on to the next part, we can't forget about quantum mechanics, right?
Oh, that's right.
Isn't that supposed to throw a wrench into this whole determinism argument?
You're right. We can't ignore quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
It introduces a level of randomness and unpredictability at the subatomic level that seems to challenge the deterministic view.
Okay, but how does this microscopic randomness affect us on a larger scale?
That's a question physicists and philosophers are still grappling with.
Right.
But some interpretations of quantum mechanics, like the many worlds interpretation, suggest that this subatomic randomness could lead to vast diverging timelines.
So like parallel universes.
Where every quantum event spawns countless parallel universes.
Whoa.
Each with its own set of possibilities.
Okay. Parallel universes. That's a whole other deep dive waiting to happen.
We could do a whole series on that.
But for now, let's stick with our current universe.
Okay.
And the question of free will.
Sounds good.
You mentioned earlier that we'd be exploring the idea of a ghost in the machine.
Yes.
What does that even mean?
Well, that's the concept of libertarian free will.
Okay.
The belief that we have the power to do otherwise, regardless of any physical constraints.
So, like, we can make choices
Yeah.
that aren't influenced by the physical world.
That's the idea. It's to suggest our minds operate independently of the physical world.
Okay.
Almost like a separate entity making decisions.
So it's like our minds are somehow detached from our brains.
Yeah, kind of.
Making choices without being bound by the laws of physics.
It's a fascinating concept.
It is. It sounds pretty far out there.
It does.
But it's also really intriguing.
Yeah, it's a head scratcher for sure.
Yeah. I'm really curious to hear more about it.
And we will in the next part.
Okay.
We'll delve into libertarian free will, its implications, and why some thinkers consider it logically incoherent nonsense.
Okay. I'm definitely hooked.
Great.
Listeners, if you're as fascinated by this free will debate as I am, you won't want to miss the next part of our deep dive.
Definitely.
We'll be tackling some of the toughest questions raised by this topic.
Absolutely.
And exploring whether there's any room for free will in a universe that might be governed by deterministic laws.
It's a big one.
Stay tuned.
We'll see you then.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Last time we were talking about a deterministic universe.
Right.
Where everything is predetermined by the laws of physics.
Yeah.
And it kind of left me wondering if that means our choices are essentially illusions.
That's a question that's really puzzled philosophers for centuries.
Right.
And it leads us to this concept of libertarian free will.
Right, the ghost in the machine.
Exactly.
So could you explain a little more about what libertarian free will actually means?
Sure. Libertarian free will is the belief that we have the power to genuinely choose between different courses of action, independent of any prior influences or physical constraints. It suggests that at any given moment, we could have chosen differently.
So if I understand correctly,
Yeah.
it's the kind of free will that makes us feel like we're truly in control. Like we could have chosen a completely different path
Right.
at any point in our lives.
Exactly. It's a very appealing concept.
Yeah, it is.
As it reinforces our sense of individuality and responsibility for our actions.
Right. But you said that some thinkers consider it logically incoherent nonsense.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a pretty strong statement.
It is a strong statement.
That makes them say that.
Well, if our choices are truly independent of any physical processes, it implies that our minds are somehow separate from our brains, capable of making decisions without being influenced by the physical world.
So it's like there's a tiny invisible puppeteer in our heads.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea.
Pulling the strings.
It would require something beyond the realm of science as we understand it.
Yeah, I see why that might be considered incoherent.
The book actually quotes neuroscientist Sam Harris, who argues that libertarian free will requires us to believe in a sort of conscious veto power.
Conscious veto power.
An ability to step outside the chain of cause and effect and make a choice unconstrained by any prior influences. But from a scientific perspective, there's no evidence to support such a notion.
So if we set aside libertarian free will,
Right.
are there any other ways to reconcile free will with the idea of a deterministic universe.
That's where compatibilism comes into play.
Compatibilism.
Compatibilists argue that free will and determinism aren't mutually exclusive.
So they can coexist.
They believe we can have both.
Okay, could you elaborate a little on how that's possible?
Sure.
It still seems kind of like a contradiction to me.
Well, compatibilists propose that free will isn't about having the ability to choose differently in any given situation. Instead, it's about acting in accordance with our desires and motivations, even if those desires are themselves determined by our genes, upbringing, and experiences.
So in a way, it's like saying we're free to act on our desires.
Yeah.
Even if we didn't choose those desires in the first place.
Precisely. Imagine you're feeling thirsty.
Okay.
You didn't choose to feel thirsty. It's a physiological need.
Right.
But you are free to choose how you quench that thirst.
Right.
You could have water juice or even wait until later.
Right.
Your choices are constrained by your circumstances and desires, but you still have the freedom to act within those constraints.
That's a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing not everyone agrees with compatibilism.
You're absolutely right. There's another perspective called hard determinism.
Hard determinism.
Which rejects compatibilism as a watered-down version of free will.
So hard determinists are basically saying that if our choices are ultimately predetermined, then we're not truly free, no matter how you spin it.
Exactly. They argue that compatibilism is like saying a puppet is free. As long as it likes its strings, ultimately the puppet is still controlled by external forces.
Right, so there's no real freedom there.
That's their argument.
Okay, I can see where they're coming from.
Yeah.
But if we take hard determinism seriously, doesn't that raise some serious questions about morality and responsibility?
It does.
If we don't have genuine free will,
can
we really hold people accountable for their actions?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
And it leads us to the heart of the moral and legal implications of determinism. The book actually delves into this topic by examining a real-life case.
Okay, what's that?
The story of Charles Whitman.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him.
The man who committed a mass shooting at the University of Texas in 1966.
I remember that case. It was a horrible tragedy.
It was a terrible event.
What does this case have to do with the question of free will?
Well, after Whitman was killed by police, an autopsy revealed he had a tumor.
A tumor?
Pressing on his amygdala, a region of the brain involved in emotional regulation and decision-making.
So are we suggesting that this tumor could have played a role in his actions?
It's a complex question.
Yeah.
And the book doesn't offer a definitive answer.
What?
But it does make us consider how our understanding of free will impacts our judgments of moral responsibility.
Right.
If someone's actions are influenced by a physical abnormality in their brain, can we still hold them fully accountable?
That's a really tough question to grapple with.
It is a tough one.
It seems like acknowledging the influence of factors like brain tumors or mental illness could completely change our approach to criminal justice.
It certainly raises questions about the traditional notions of guilt and punishment. The book suggests that even in a deterministic world, there are still valid reasons for having a justice system.
What kind of reasons if people aren't truly responsible for their actions? What's the point of punishing them?
Well, retribution, or punishment for its own sake, might lose its justification in a deterministic world. Other goals of the justice system, such as deterrence and rehabilitation, remain relevant.
So instead of focusing on punishing people for past actions, we should focus on preventing future harm.
Exactly.
And helping individuals make better choices.
It's about shifting the focus from blame to understanding.
Right.
From punishment to rehabilitation and harm reduction.
Okay, I can see how that shift would make sense.
Right.
But I'm curious, if these debates about free will and determinism are so important for understanding human behavior, why haven't they been more widely discussed in fields like psychology and sociology?
That's a great question, and it's one the book addresses as well. It turns out there are historical reasons why social science has often been hesitant to engage with these topics.
What kind of historical reasons?
Well, the book explains that in the late 19th and early 20th centuries,
determinism was often used to justify discriminatory beliefs and practices.
So like...
Think of things like eugenics.
Oh, wow.
and racial determinism,
Right.
which were used to promote racist policies and social hierarchies.
So determinism got a bad rap.
Yeah, you could say that.
Because it was twisted to support harmful ideologies.
Exactly. And as a result, there was a backlash against any suggestion that human behavior might be determined by factors beyond individual control. So social science shifted its focus towards individual agency and free will as a way of combating these deterministic arguments that were being used to justify oppression and inequality.
I can see how that happened.
Right.
But it's also kind of ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
By rejecting determinism altogether, social science might have missed out on some valuable insights into how factors like genetics, upbringing, and social structures influence human behavior. It highlights the importance of approaching these complex issues with nuance and avoiding overly simplistic interpretations. Determinism, when taken to extremes, can be harmful, but so can an overly idealistic view of free will that ignores the very real constraints and influences that shape our lives.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together. It seems like we've gone through the spectrum of perspectives on free will.
We have.
From the most idealistic to the most deterministic. But where do we go from here? If we accept that libertarian free will is unlikely and that our choices are influenced by factors beyond our conscious control, does that mean we're doomed to live in a world without meaning or purpose?
Not at all. In fact, the book ends on a surprisingly optimistic note.
Really?
It argues that recognizing our interconnectedness and the vast chain of cause-effect that led to this very moment can be a source of awe and wonder.
I'm intrigued. How can determinism be a source of awe and wonder? It sounds kind of depressing to me.
Well, think about it this way. Everything that has happened in the history of the universe, every random event, every collision of particles, every evolutionary leap has led to this very moment.
Wow.
To us being here right now.
That is a pretty mind-blowing thought.
It is, isn't it?
It's like we're all part of this grand cosmic story that's been unfolding for billions of years.
Exactly.
But how does that make determinism less depressing?
It shifts our focus from what we can't control to what we can control. If every action, every choice has ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves, it makes our lives incredibly meaningful.
So instead of lamenting the fact that we might not have libertarian free will, we can choose to focus on the impact our actions have on the world around us.
Exactly. It's like instead of being trapped in a predetermined script, we're participating in a grand improvisation.
Oh, I like that.
Where each of us has a role to play in shaping the story as it unfolds.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And it's a perspective that allows us to find meaning and purpose. Even in a universe that might not be as free as we once imagined.
This has been a lot to process.
It has.
We've gone from libertarian free will to determinism. From brain tumors to parallel universes.
We've covered a lot of ground.
And somehow ended up with a sense of hope and interconnectedness.
It's been quite a journey.
I think we need a moment to absorb all of this.
I agree.
Before we move on to the final part of our deep dive.
But before we do, I'd like to leave you with a question to ponder. If, as the book suggests, we are all interconnected, and every action, no matter how small, has ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves, how might that change your perspective on your own life?
That is a great question to ponder.
It is a big one.
Listeners, join us for the final part of this deep dive, where we will explore some final thoughts from this fascinating chapter. And try to answer that question. Welcome back to the deep dive. In the last two parts, we went on quite a journey.
It was quite the exploration.
Exploring all those beliefs surrounding free will.
All those different perspectives.
It started with that idea of a deterministic universe.
Where everything's predetermined.
And then we were grappling with that concept of libertarian free will.
The ghost in the machine.
The ghost in the machine, and then we kind of landed somewhere in between.
With compatibilism and hard determinism.
And, you know, it's interesting because this might seem like a purely theoretical discussion.
It can seem that way.
But it actually has huge implications for how we view ourselves, our relationships, our place in the universe.
Absolutely. It touches on everything.
And at the end of the last part, you left us with a pretty thought-provoking question.
I did.
You asked how our perspective on life might change if we truly believe that all actions, no matter how small, have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves?
It's a big question.
It is a big question.
It challenges us to think beyond just ourselves.
Right.
And consider how everything's connected.
So how does the book address this question?
Well, it argues that instead of being a source of despair, recognizing this interconnectedness can actually be incredibly empowering.
That's interesting. How so?
Well, instead of feeling trapped by some predetermined fate, this perspective allows us to see ourselves as part of something much bigger.
Okay.
Like we're characters in this vast unfolding story.
So it's like we're all characters in a cosmic play.
Yeah, you could say that.
Each with our own unique roles to fulfill.
And even though we may not have written the script, our actions still contribute to the narrative.
So every choice we make,
no
matter how
small,
can influence the course of events.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from what we can't control to what we can control.
And the book uses a really beautiful metaphor.
It does.
To describe this shift.
What's that?
It says, we are all the living manifestation of 13.7 billion years of flukes.
Wow, that's powerful.
That's a powerful image, right?
It really is.
It suggests that every random event, every chance encounter, every twist of fate throughout the history of the universe has led to this very moment.
We're the product of it all.
And if that's the case, then it makes our lives incredibly significant.
It does. We're walking, talking miracles.
Right.
The culmination of this unimaginable chain of events.
It's like winning the cosmic lottery just by existing.
Exactly. And that realization can be a source of both humility and awe.
I can see that.
It reminds us that we're not isolated individuals, but rather these interconnected threads in a grand cosmic tapestry.
So instead of feeling insignificant in a deterministic universe, we can actually find a sense of belonging and purpose in our connection to something so much larger than ourselves.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of all things, from the smallest subatomic particle to the largest galaxy.
Right. And that realization can be a source of immense joy and wonder.
It really can.
But how do we actually translate this perspective into our daily lives?
I
mean, it's one thing to contemplate the interconnectedness of the universe, but how does that change how we interact with the world, with other people?
Well, the book suggests that this perspective encourages us to approach life with a sense of responsibility and compassion. If we truly believe that all actions have ripple effects, we become much more mindful of the choices we make.
So it's about recognizing that even seemingly small actions can have far-reaching consequences.
Precisely. It encourages us to act with intention. Knowing that our choices not only affect ourselves, but also those around us and potentially even future generations.
So it's a call to live with a sense of purpose. Knowing that our lives matter, that we have the power to make a difference in the world.
Exactly. And it's a perspective that can bring meaning and fulfillment even in the face of challenges and setbacks.
This deep dive has taken us on an incredible journey.
It really has.
We started out wrestling with that question of whether we have free will.
Right, one of the biggest questions.
And we ended up exploring the interconnectedness of the universe. And the profound meaning that can be found in recognizing our place within it.
It's been a fascinating exploration.
It has.
And I hope it's encouraged you to reflect on your own beliefs about free will and determinism.
I know I have.
Good.
What are some final thoughts from the book that we can leave our listeners with?
Well, the book concludes by urging us to embrace the mystery and complexity of the universe, to find joy in the journey, and to remember that even if we don't have all the answers, our lives still have profound meaning and purpose.
That's a beautiful message to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, listeners.
This was a pleasure.
We hope you found it thought-provoking and insightful. And remember, even in a deterministic universe, your choices matter. Until next time, keep exploring,